Status quo. The Princess Aurora was spinning again. She couldn't help it. When the corridors were wide, inviting, and empty, when bright bands of actual sunlight slipped through the vines, and the windows, golden and slow, puddling on the ground the way she imagined it did in real forests, when the soft carpet beckoned, patterned with dark colours and bright spots the way meadows were supposed to be, then she would sing and spin, twirling down the corridor, feeling the warm moments of light on her skin as she flung her arms out, trying to recapture snippets of dreams that once in a while involved the woods. Sometimes she took off her golden shoes. She would sing whatever came to mind and seemed appropriate for the moment, bits from the nicer tunes the minstrel taught her, proper ballads from her music tutor, half-remembered lullabies, snippets of her own invention. Sometimes, just before sleep claimed her, music rang in her sleepy ears, entire orchestras and choruses proclaiming sternly but joyfully some unremembered thing. Sometimes she would try to remember those tunes and sing them too. This was usually a good corridor for twirling. It was on the southern side of the castle, just above the great hall, and if the hot winds outside managed to scrape away the layers of smoke and soot, sunbeams would sometimes form. The far end of the corridor led to a wide set of formal stone stairs that had balustrades, good for dragging the tips of her fingers dramatically along while pushing herself back and forth to each side, like a deer happily tumbling down a waterfall. Or maybe it was fish who did that. She was always getting them confused. At the bottom she tried to cross and uncross her feet quickly, the way she had seen some of the troubadours and girl performers do. Her golden hair fell like a ripple of costly fabric, first down one shoulder and then the other, as she quickly shifted position. She lifted the hem of her dress so she could watch her feet and make sure they were doing what they were supposed to do, but it was all so utterly graceful that anyone watching would have thought it was a part of the performance. Of course, anyone watching might have also wondered at a young woman, much less a royal princess, prancing about like that. She pirouetted alongside a table in the lesser banquet hall, did a little leap through a side pantry, shuffled past an only slightly surprised serving boy, and brisée through what was once an orangery, but whose glass was now covered in thick protective vines like the rest of the castle. Aurora only paused her singing and dancing when she came to the wide, iron-clad door that led to the special dungeon. At the bottom of a long, winding flight of cold stone stairs were several small, rounded chambers that looked like the lairs of mud-dober wasps. Some of them were empty. There was little to no crime in the castle, since there was nowhere else to go, no one you could escape from in a remaining population of less than 1,000, and nothing worth stealing. When the minstrel got a little too drunk and out of hand, the queen would throw him in stocks. Only once did she ever actually send him to the dungeon to dry out. No, the only people down there now were the architects of the end of the known world, Princess Aurora's parents, King Stefan and Queen Leah. Once she had sneaked down there to look upon her progenitors. Her Aunt Maleficent had never forbidden her from doing so. Her aunt had never forbidden her anything. Aurora didn't know why she felt she had to do it on the sly. But she had waited until Maleficent had been down and come back up, so she knew there would be torches still lit, and the way would not be utterly black. Aurora had slipped off her golden shoes and tiptoed, sticking closely to the rough-hewn walls, flattening herself like a child playing hide-and-seek. The king and queen had been dazed-eyed and silent, sitting on the one hard bench in their tiny cell, staring at nothing at all. There was no emotion in either of their faces. They were like statues waiting for the end of time, for the castle itself to crumble down around them. Chilled, Aurora had fled back upstairs as quick as she could, and found her Aunt Maleficent and wrapped her in exactly the sort of hug the old woman didn't like, but put up with on occasion for the sake of her adopted daughter. Aurora had no intention of ever going down to the dungeon again. For now she just shivered and moved quickly past the dungeon door, all desire to dance withered and gone. Her parents had danced, it was said, as the world tumbled down around them, their sickness, their evilness, their greed and heartlessness that ran so thick through their blood. It was in Aurora's blood too, naturally. Feeling a rise of panic, she began to race to the throne room, stopping just before the door to enter at a more regal rate, smoothing the front of her dress. Maleficent sat upon the throne with an easy elegance Aurora wished she had. Her long fingers languidly pointed here and gestured there as she spoke. It was almost time for the Mid-November ball. A full month had passed since the previous festivities. The room was filled with servants and minor royalty, all with last-minute requests for magical adjustments to their costumes, or additions to the menu, or royal approval of a certain dance. Some of the servants weren't strictly human. Some of the servants were black and grey and strangely shaped. They had beaks instead of mouths, or pig snouts, or worse, no mouths at all. Their feet were cloven hooves or spurred chicken claws or huge splayed trotters. But they were needed to keep the fowler monsters at bay, the ones from outside. Maleficent summoned them out of clay and spirits from another world. A not very nice world, the princess guessed. Their intelligence was negligible. Their silence was insisted upon by the queen, who saw the effect they had on the uneasy human residents of the fortress. Aurora was torn about this. The good-hearted girl rued the unfairness of the strict orders they were under, and yet they were so unsettling. Maleficent's eyes caught Aurora, and her face cracked into a pleased smile. "Come, my girl, over here. You're a welcome break from these weary preparations." "Auntie," Aurora said with relief, approaching the throne and standing beside the queen. As always, her fears and doubts subsided the moment she was near the saviour of the kingdom. She felt safe. "Really, you shouldn't bother yourself with all this. You do so much else for the kingdom." "Ah, but this is important for morale, my sweet," Maleficent said, raising an arched eyebrow as she smiled down upon her wand. "We're none of us able to leave the castle until the world heals. Well, we need these diversions to keep our spirits up." She lifted a long finger and tucked a lock of golden hair behind Aurora's ear. "Besides, your parents neglected you for 16 years. You went 16 years without a ball or a birthday, even though you were a royal princess. Most peasants do more for their children." "Thank you, Aunt Maleficent," Aurora murmured, lowering her head. She felt nothing but gratitude towards the woman who cared for her, but she still couldn't look her aunt directly in her yellow eyes. They never seemed to focus on anything. It was impossible to tell precisely what the woman felt, except when she made an effort by moving her mouth. "I like the theme you chose this time," Maleficent said, a smile twitching at the edge of her lips. "Sky and water blue. Very poetic." "I have to use my imagination," Aurora said, "since I've never seen the sea or a river." In her dreams, sometimes tinkling streams flowed past cool and shaded mudbanks, but obviously that was a product of her own starved imagination, and often it was all in shades of brown. "You've done quite well," Maleficent petted Aurora on her head like, well, a pet. A funny stroking motion that seemed meant for something else. Another curious habit of her aunt's. "Now listen. You know well the ball is going to go on until very late tonight. Why don't you run along and take a little nap so you'll be refreshed? I know how much you love to dance." "But I want to help." "Another time, dear," Maleficent said, touching her gently on the cheek. "There will be plenty more of these in the years to come." "Yes, Aunt Maleficent." "Thank you, Aunt Maleficent," Aurora said dutifully, then leaned forwards and stuck a quick kiss on her aunt's hollow cheek. Maleficent's eyes darted nervously. The powerful fairy had not asked to be the saviour of the only people left in the world. She had not asked for the world to be destroyed in the first place. She had not asked to become the parent of a neglected princess. She probably just wanted to live by herself in her old castle, practicing her spells and communing with powers beyond the ken of mortal men, happily ever after. So if she wasn't used to the hugs or kisses or other displays of affection Aurora had not received from her own parents, well, they would just both have to learn. Aurora would wear her down eventually. The princess walked slowly back to her room. The hall was wide, empty and inviting, but she didn't feel like twirling this time. She felt useless and desultory. "Your Highness!" A hand clawed her shoulder from behind. Aurora spun around, but it was just the old minstrel. His face was pale, and his long narrow nose was pinched beyond its usual extreme. He seemed more degenerate and wild than ever. His clothes were torn in a dozen different places, and there were scratches near his eyes that made it look like he was crying blood. "You are unwell, Master Tummins," Aurora said gently. She couldn't smell anything about him, not even the home-brewed moonshine some of the peasants had become to amuse themselves by distilling. But he was so far gone that sometimes not having a dram drove him to fits. "It's out there! It is! There is an outside!" He looked behind himself wildly, and then grabbed Aurora's hands and pressed his own around them. "Your Highness, I escaped!" "Unhand me, you are sick," Aurora repeated, only a little alarmed at his behaviour. She was more concerned about his health, and what would happen if anyone caught him touching her in such a manner. Familiar and obviously irregular footsteps came towards them. The sound drove the minstrel to hysteria. Aurora reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. "Perhaps we should have a little lie down." But it was too late. Shuffling around the corner were two of Maleficent's private guards, oily black and grey monsters who moved ponderously along, barely upright. They looked like they had been put together wrong. The minstrel's eyes widened in naked terror when he saw them, but he didn't take his attention off the princess. "Your Highness!" Come away from her, singing human, the more pig-like creature snuffled loudly. Maleficent commands you sleep it off and leave her air alone. You are the key, the minstrel whispered, throwing herself at the princess so his lips touched her ear. She tried not to pull away. You! It's all still out there! Minstrel, said the other guard, the one with the comb of a cockle and the yellow eyes of a demon. They each put a horrible clawed hand on the poor man's shoulders. They swung him aloft like he was no more than a speck of dust. Your Highness, the minstrel cried. The monstrous guards laughed. Sing for us, and we might not hurt you too much on the way to the dungeon. Please be easy on him, Aurora urged. He's having a fit of some kind. He needs a doctor, not a beating. Sing, the second one commanded, ignoring her. Neither monster bothered to bow as they walked away. Sing! The minstrel tried his best, tears running down his bloody face, borne aloft on the shoulders of nightmares. Doche, doche, dame jolie. Aurora watched him go with sadness and horror. And maybe, just maybe, a tiny spark of something too hideous to admit. Relief that the afternoon had become more interesting. After they were out of sight, all that remained was the quickly fading song, streaming through the hall like smoke. Pour tu ne pense mieux que nul ait signori, c'est moi fauve seulement. Aurora noticed her hands were still clasped where the minstrel had held them. When she pulled them apart, she found he had pressed something there for her to hold. She held it up in wonder. It was a single brilliant blue feather.